So yeah, thank you for having this time, the Limor from Israel. I'm very glad to have the time with you this moment. You are professional, the privacy space, also the tech space in Israel. This time is the very good opportunities to have a conversation, talking about the futures, each countries as well as the international collaborations. So let's begin. First of all, Limor-san, please introduce about yourself, the activities, also your background, which is very helpful for all the listeners to figure out what you're doing.
Thank you. So thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this interview. My name is Limor Shmerling Magazanik, and I work in the area of data protection, privacy, cybersecurity, various areas of regulation and policy in having to do with emerging technologies in places where we have technology, data, and the digital sphere changing how we do things in society and in the economy. And I'm the managing director of the Israel Tech Policy Institute. And we are a think tank, a research institute founded in Tel Aviv in Israel in 2018. And we were established as a local chapter of the Future of Privacy Forum. The Future of Privacy Forum is a Washington, D.C. based, a US-based nonprofit. And we all work in the field of creating policies to support emerging technologies. We do work that is combining private sector and governments and policymakers and also other civil society organizations and academia researchers and everything in order to create good policy, good ethics, working on privacy by design, human rights by design. So new technologies, emerging technologies are best serving to humanity and best serving for people. And in order to early on recognize potential risks, potential problems, potential unintended consequences, that we want to find, to be aware of them in advance or to learn from past experience and to create the methods and the ways and the mitigation measures to counteract these undesirable effects and enjoy technology and data in a way that is good for everyone.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I saw that your activities, they also the institution, which is the very very great actions regarding the data protection space. So I'm very curious about the Israel tech space because a lot of the privacy people is coming from the Israel, from my knowledge. So why you are very excited about the privacy space and data protections from Israel?
So one of the things that we've seen in 2019 is, I think, a very interesting development. We've seen privacy, which is a global issue that is governed by legislation in Europe, the GDPR, in California, the new California Consumer Privacy Act. In other countries, there are various types of privacy regulations. Many countries also around Asia have laws or new laws or evolving regulations on data protection. And this is also in existence here in Israel. And at the same time, Israel has a very robust startup nation scene. A lot of startups, a lot of high-tech industry, very, very well developed and financed for many years already. We also have presentation here of multinational companies who are having R&D centers, research and development centers here in Israel, and also commercial activities in Israel. And the combination of the fact that we have human rights and privacy protection bylaws, and also a very robust high-tech ecosystem, brought to attention the need for privacy technologies. So privacy is something that has been around in laws and books, and also in procedures in organizations with privacy officers, also in the United States and in other places, working to protect the laws and the rules and creating processes in organizations. But as privacy landscape has become much more complex, much more demanding, much more large scale, there was a realization that we need technologies to support this effort, that it's not enough just to have an Excel spreadsheet and people who are dedicated and motivated, which is great, but we need also tools to support data protection efforts and to support compliance with the various regulations and the differences in various places around the world. So privacy technologies, we've seen in 2019 and recognized that this is a new R&D vertical. This should be something by its own right that we look at, we analyze, we define. We see that the investment arms of both venture capital funds in Israel and in other countries, and also investment arms of multinationals and governments are starting to be more and more interested in privacy technologies. And in 2019, we've seen quite a few rounds of investments at various stages earlier, and even E rounds, etc. And we've seen purchases and mergers, and we've seen larger numbers of investments coming into play. And we at the Israel Tech Policy Institute, together with the Future of Privacy Forum, thought that this is a good sign. This shows that this market is evolving and growing. And for example, in Israel, I can tell you about a few privacy startups. For example, Duality is a startup that is developing a multi-party computation solution. They have pilots in either the health industry and the financial industry, and they have recently received funding, considerable funding from Intel Corporation. Also, there is a company named Big ID, an Israeli startup that has already grown. They already have headquarters in New York, and they've had several big rounds of investments, tens of millions of dollars in the past year. They do software that enables the management of compliance with data protection regulation, a very advanced AI tool to identify various types of data across the organization, tag them, organize them, have them ready and enabled to give people access rights, portability rights. There's also an example of DID, an Israeli startup that does obfuscation of visual data in order to enable the management of biometric data, facial photo recognition, and they manage it in a way that makes it impossible for a person to look at a photo, look at a person and identify them, but for machines not to be able to distinguish and make the comparison. They have recently partnered with a Japanese company, Top Time Printing, and they have a partnership to bring their solution to the identity protection of facial identification in the Japanese market. So these are very interesting examples of privacy technologies being implemented and being supported and driving the market. There are also examples in Israel that I've come to learn at the IBM Research and Development Center in Haifa, and the NEC, the NEC Operation R&D Center here in Israel. They have privacy technology advanced tools for various types of solutions and activities. And these are all, I think, playing a part and will play a considerable and larger role
Mm-hmm.
in the use of data. And I think that especially now with the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing an increased need to access data, to share data, to
Mm-hmm.
use technology and data in order to fight the pandemic, in order to protect people's health and life from the virus. And you doing that in a data protection responsible way and with privacy by design and privacy measures
Mm-hmm.
is very important. And this is an effort that I see privacy technologies supporting
Mm-hmm.
considerably.
Yeah, that's very interesting points. Um, so the next question is, we also started the privacy by design concept, the grassroots approach here in Japan. But the problem is regarding the privacy, we have maybe the two parts. One is a technical solution. The other is the more humanic actions, such as like even the privacy, 10 people there has a different identifications. The problem is the one people is said that this is a privacy protection, but this is the abusement. It's in the different. The 10 people, they have the 10 people differences. So how do you what is the best way to overcome the best practice for the privacy protections? I think it's not the perfect and just the legal, just the technique. Also need to include the ethics of many things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I absolutely agree. I think that every time that we use technology and we take data and process personal data of people in order to achieve a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
we need to firstly be acknowledged and to acknowledge and understand the potential ramifications to
Mm-hmm.
people's well-being and rights.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's a larger balance, and I actually think it's going beyond privacy by design into what I think we should call human rights by design.
Mm-hmm.
Because looking at this example that we're all living in at the moment of health and protecting people's lives and protecting people's health, this is a human right. The human right to the sanctity of life is a basic human right that we wish to protect.
Yeah.
And if we have technology and digital measures that can help us in that, I think we have a responsibility to use them.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, there's also considerations that for the moment, the way that governments are addressing the pandemic and trying to cope with it is by restrictions of movement.
Mm-hmm.
The freedom of movement and liberty is also a human right that is very important in democracy and in a society. Freedom of movement is a basic right. It is also associated with the freedom of assembly, with the right to protest, with social activities that are protected by human rights. Looking at the ramifications of the quarantine and lockdowns to the economy, we're also experiencing a very, very dire situation for many people who lose their livelihood, who are unable to support themselves or will not be able to support themselves. This is also an infliction on the human right to livelihood, to dignity, to a dignified existence and supporting yourself. So there's a lot of conflict between human rights. And then also we have the right to our privacy, which is very important to our individual well-being and also to our society and community and democracy. And there's also the right to equality, the right to be treated fairly, and the connection between that and the processing of our data. So I think that the picture is very complex, excuse me, and that when we are looking, for example, at the use of proximity applications by governments in order to counteract the pandemic, we're looking at potential infringements of privacy because we're using very sensitive health data, location data. These are all very sensitive data.
Mm-hmm.
We're using technological means to collect this data and create additional risks to this data. But at the same time, we need to remember that the purpose is to protect life and to protect livelihood. And if we can use these proximity apps in order to flex the restrictions on movement, to flex the quarantines and lockdowns, to have people be able to start gradually going back to work and making a living, then we have here a balance which we may be okay to accept. So I think it's a risk analysis that we need to be doing, and we need to understand privacy and privacy impact assessments very well in order to be able to do that. We need to have privacy professionals participate in the debate together with data scientists, epidemiologists, doctors, health organization, and government officials, and also economics officials and social science specialists. And then we can have the complex discussion that we need to be conducting in order to arrive at a balanced approach.
Yeah, that is very excellent approach. So in Japan, we have to consider this kind of activities because we had a change stage from the controllable actions regarding the infections numbers in the corona situations. In that cases, we need a more diversified background who familiar with the economics. They also some psychologies, the sociologies, the many people is needs to be come into one place to share them each of the expertise. So how does the Israel government is gather these experts? Is that more kind of the democratic approach, or just any team has been in existence already before the corona has happened?
Interesting question. So the Israeli government has, from the start of this crisis, enlisted a team that works with the health ministry of experts from the private sector that work with the government. I think that they were mainly at the beginning epidemiologists and doctors, and but as the situation evolved, there was a call, a public call in the media and in the public discourse to also include financial experts to look at the financial situation and angle as well. And later on also to include people from the social sciences. So this is something that was realized, I think, as an evolving process during the crisis. I think it was there in principle in the thought in the back of people's minds, but this reality made it much more clear and sped up. I think that what we're seeing in many ways currently is that this situation, this very extreme and unprecedented situation, has triggered and has fast-forwarded processes that were in play before, but at a much slower pace. So, for example, expediting government services digitally. And there are new initiatives that in the past were taking a long time and may have been very beneficial even before. But now, under the context of this crisis, we're seeing, for example, the conducting court sessions with digital means, with applications that allow video conferencing, and that's an idea that people were thinking about for many years prior to this, but there was not a dire need. And sometimes necessity is the mother of all invention. So we're seeing it in the court systems very I think, a very good and positive sign. Court sessions being conducted with digital means, affidavits being signed and authorized by lawyers with digital signatures. We're seeing a lot more government services starting and evolving into the digital sphere. We're seeing various ideas and programs and giving out tablets to the elderly population in order to maintain the connection with them and interact with them at this time and offer them support from a distance. We've seen monitoring of patients via tech means with using cameras and applications and robots that are going into secluded areas in order to bring medication and food. And it's a huge opportunity and time for technology to thrive. And again, as we've been talking in this conversation, it's also a time to look at things critically and look at things in an informed way and make sure that we do not run over very important human rights in the process. And proximity applications are a very good, interesting example of one of these, let's say, huge experiments that we are currently conducting, and that it's worth learning from each other's experiences.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. The team associated. So the next question is, I'm wondering, the your proximity apps is just based on the open source. It's just very similar to the Singapore style. So how the government or you in Israel is planning to collaborate with the other countries, like in Singapore, is started to talk with the European Union, just started similar apps in Europe. Then Germany is started the new services that. So any planning to spread the open source technology to other countries?
It's a good question. I'm not aware of that, but that is a question better taken, I think, with the health ministry and the people who manage that project there. I think that the example of proximity apps is a really good example to learn privacy by design through. Because looking at various government proximity apps and initiatives, and there are quite a few, we actually at the Future of Privacy Forum have prepared a chart that compares the various applications, not all of them, of course, but quite a few applications from different governments and tracer apps. And we've also mapped what types of data they use, how they work, what types of access to the data is there, what's their privacy by design methods. And this is an open resource that you can use and go and get a lot of information, detailed information from it on the Future of Privacy Forum site. I think that perhaps I can demonstrate with Hamgen, the Israeli app, and maybe pinpoint several of the privacy by design considerations that were considered during this project. So for example, it's worth understanding that these tracer apps are not created in a vacuum. They're not a standalone solution. They're a part of a myriad of solutions that governments are using, and they should be viewed in this context. So in Israel, and I guess in many other countries, from the start of patient one, the government, the health ministry, has conducted epidemiological research of each and every identified patient. And in that research, there was a tracing of their whereabouts in the days before they were identified as patients. And this was being done both by interviewing them one-on-one, but also by asking to access the credit card details, which is a signifier of the places and shops and restaurants and banks maybe, or whereabouts where they were in the days prior when they were already infectious. and also by asking them to share location data from their mobile. And this gave the research team a very detailed itinerary, very accurate itinerary of dates and times of location data where these people were. And they published this in an open database of the ministry, which doesn't have the exact identifiers of the person, but only the age and the city of residence and the itinerary. And all of the public in Israel was invited to check themselves and see whether they have come in contact with this person, whether they visited this bookshop in this mall at this time and date, and they should self-quarantine themselves. But early enough it was realized that this is very difficult to sustain in a scale. And when you had 1, 2, 3 identified patients per day, it was maybe feasible. But when you have tens and more, and you want the entire population to follow their itinerary, it becomes an impossible mission. And then that's where tracer apps come into play. They automate this process, and they also assist in the research of tracing the steps of the identified patient themselves. So Hamgen, the shield, is an application that was developed by the health ministry together with a private sector company. And privacy by design was taken into account. There was a privacy expert who advised the project, and also a security expert who did the testing. And for example, what type of data is very important. So you could be collecting data in general. You could be collecting location data from mobile service providers, and then the data will be from cell tower antennas, or from GPS, which is also used by mobile carriers from the satellite network. The level of accuracy for this type of data and location data, for the purpose of finding out whether you have been in proximity of less than 2 meters to an identified patient, is not very good. So this data will not provide the effectiveness that you will probably wish for in a mobile proximity app that says this, you now need to go into quarantine. So one of the decisions made with Hamgen in Israel is that the app is a recommendation. It's a supportive tool. It's a mechanism to support a decision of a person to self-quarantine. And it is advised for people who download and use the app to decide to employ discretion. So for example, if I download the app and then I get an alert that I was in close proximity to an identified patient, but I know that I have been in my apartment for the past 48 hours and I wasn't near anyone else apart from my immediate family, then perhaps the identified patient is in the apartment next to me behind a wall. And then the decision to self-quarantine is not warranted. So if you take this app and the government makes it a decisive app, so if there is an alert, you are under mandatory quarantine and there is no dispute and no appeal and no discretion, then you may be infringing on people's rights in an unproportionate way. But if you take under account the level of accuracy and effectiveness of this app and take it as a supportive measure, you're putting it in a context that allows more flexibility and allows more freedom to the individual to participate in the decision to self-quarantine. And also you get to a better level of protection of human rights. Another example is that the download of the app by itself is voluntary. So for example, in Israel, 1.5 million people out of about 4 million relevant users downloaded the app. This is quite impressive on the one hand, and I think it shows trust and support by people to the government app. But still, I heard from data scientists that in order to be effective in the fight of the pandemic, and also to enable the exit strategies and the flexing of the lockdown and home restrictions, then you need at least 60% of the population to be using it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you don't have enough people using it, and also you have the problems of the accuracy, then you have, when you do the risk analysis, you have to factor that in your decisions, whether you can go back to the regular normal life, or you need to maybe employ other measures.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, that's very great achievement. I saw that in Israel it's been saved in a low rate of the mortality, which is very amazing. In South Korea is also they are very put the enforcement. It's been a very strong leadership the government. But in Israel, I heard from you that you are very bottom up approach. The individual can control themselves based on the privacy. Then you made a very successful the numbers at this moment, which is a very the informative we can learn from your success cases there. So that's very amazing to hear that. So yeah, lastly, I'm very happy to be given your message to the listeners, the mostly in Japan, I guess. So yeah, please give a message through that.
Thank you. So I really think that this is a time for international cooperation and in the fight against this threat, because this is a threat to people of all nations, of all nationalities. It doesn't discriminate between people infected. And it's also a time of, I think, great opportunity for technology and for data to be a tool to promote humanity, both in the fight against this pandemic, but also in creating better use of technology around us and promoting ourselves into a better era. I think in this great opportunity, there's also potential risk that we need to be aware of, and we need to together find the ways to make the best of the situation, to make the best of technology and data, and to understand how to downplay the risks, not to downplay, to tackle the risks. And I think it's a time of great potential for collaboration between countries to learn together how to do this much better.
Yeah, great message. So yeah, thank you for having this interview. I'm very appreciated to having you this time as well. It's a time to be consider the future collaboration to fight against this critical incidents, but we can see the more bright futures if we can to move into the successful approach in each other. So thank you for having this time the interviews.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was my pleasure to share my thoughts, and it's a great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.